Networks are useful to adults. There's no doubt about that. LinkedIn is very useful. People use it to advance their purposes. So all of these things, including Facebook, used to be called social networking systems. You can do a Google Trends search on that, and you'll see that term rose very high. And then that term begins to drop in the 2010s. We don't call them that anymore. After 2009, they became much more viral. We got the like button, the retweet button. It's not about connecting people. It's now about performing on a platform. And so we now call them social media platforms. Now, platforms can be useful to adults too if you want to yell and scream and shout and promote your brand. So these things are not very good for adults, but we let adults make their choices. What about kids? Should children grow up playing with each other and sometimes getting into arguments and fights between the two of them and then working it out? Or is it better if they all stand on a platform where they can say things in public, including to strangers, and then they can be publicly shamed by potentially millions of people? Some of those kids then commit suicide. The case of Molly Russell in the UK is the famous one, but we have many, many in the US as well. To give a more concise answer, social networks are useful for adults. I don't believe social networks are useful at all for children. Children should not be on social networks. They should be playing in person. Social media platforms should never be accessed by children until they're 18. It's just insane that we let kids do these things that can ruin their lives. Instagram is the worst for teen mental health for girls because of the social comparison. And also there's all kinds of new forms of bullying that take place on Instagram. TikTok is probably the worst for their intellectual development. I think it literally reduces their ability to focus on anything while stuffing them with little bits of stuff that was selected by an algorithm for emotional arousal, not for truth, for emotional arousal. The fact that almost half of American Gen Z says if given the choice between do you support Israel, or do you side more with Israel or Hamas, which way do you go? Well, the great majority of Americans side with Israel, except for Gen Z, which is split 50-50. And there was a Twitter thread recently showing how if you look at what people are seeing on TikTok, you can understand why. TikTok is probably the most, TikTok and Twitter are incredibly dangerous for our democracy. I'd say they're incompatible with the kind of liberal democracy that we developed over the last few hundred years. But Instagram is the worst for girls' mental health.
If you do this, that's it, my social life goes.
Thank you. That's a perfect statement of what we call a collective action problem. In the social sciences, especially economics, there's a lot of research on collective action problems. It's just what you described. Any one person doing the right thing is in big trouble. Nobody wants to have their kid be isolated. Why do we ever let our kids on social media? It's only because of the dynamic you just said. And what that means is that we have to look to the literature on how you solve collective action problems. And the main ways are if you can set norms and if you can have laws and policies. So I'd like to set a norm right here. So I'm suggesting 4 norms in my book, and these are all ways to solve collective action problems, and we can all do them even though the US Congress may never do anything to help us, although of course the UK Parliament is doing great work. No smartphones before high school, which in the US is grade 9, around age 14. Just don't give your kids a smartphone. But they'll be cut off. No, you give them a flip phone. The millennials had flip phones. They texted each other, see you at 4 at the mall, and then they would meet at the mall. So just don't give a smartphone to your 10-year-old. Wait till 14, or high school. We have to think about especially saving elementary school and what we call middle school. If we can get the phones out of there, the collective action problem is solved, and those kids will not have phone-based childhoods. Rule number 2, no social media before 16. So if your kid is the only one who's not on Instagram at 12, it's very hard on her. But what if half the kids are not on Instagram? Now, do you feel as a parent you could say, well, you know what? Half the kids in your grade are on Instagram, half are not? No, you're not getting this till you're 16. Kids are terrified of being the only one, cut off, left out. But if half the kids are not on social media and they actually meet up after school and they do fun things, they'll become the cool kids. Third rule, phone-free schools. Get phones out of schools, and I've got to say once again, the UK, and England, your health minister, or education minister, I'm sorry, declared that all schools in England should go phone-free. I just want to put in the plug that does not mean you can keep it in your backpack. That's better than nothing, but really to make it phone-free, because the kids are so addicted, it needs to be, you put them in a locked a phone locker or in a Yonder pouch. Otherwise, the kids are going to go to the bathroom. They'll find ways to get their fix. And rule 4 is far more free play and for unsupervised play and childhood independence. Both of our countries freaked out in the 90s, locked up our kids because we lost trust in each other. We thought everyone's a child molester or rapist. So that's it. If we do those 4 things, and even if half of us do them, we solve the collective action problems. Something happened around 2012. It began to show up with weirdness on campus in 2014. That led me and Greg Lukianoff to write the Coddling the American Mind article. We tried to figure out what caused this weird new morality, these terrible ideas. We thought maybe social media has something to do with it, but we didn't know in 2015. Then we wrote our book, published in 2018, and now we had a little more evidence, but still it wasn't crystal clear in the scientific literature. And even today, it's not crystal clear when we look at the published research. But when we look all around us, you talk to the teachers, you talk to the psychologists, you talk to the parents, you talk to members of Gen Z, nobody defends this phone-based childhood. Everybody sees the problems. If you plot out the trend lines for depression and anxiety, self-harm and suicide, they're relatively flat until around 2010. And then all over the English-speaking world, they start shooting up around 2012 plus or minus a year. Rates of suicide are at peak levels across the Anglosphere, but only for girls. What we're seeing is a very sharp, sudden change in girls' mental health all around the Anglosphere and the Nordic countries. It's the same thing. It's in those countries where there was a lot of independence and young people were not deeply rooted in communities, in religious communities, and in families. There's a lot of individualism. In those countries, when everything changed around 2012, all the kids got smartphones, or the girls all went on Instagram. It's right around then that in the Anglo and Nordic countries, the girls especially get washed away. And you cannot grow up in networks, you have to grow up in communities. It's especially, it's not just girls, it's girls on the left, and it's secular conservatives. So if you're if you're a kid who's a religious conservative, on average, your mental health is not really much worse than it was 10 years ago. But if you're a secular liberal girl, you probably, literally, like more than half say, I have been told that I have a mental health problem. If the next generation has such severe levels of anxiety and fragility and has so little experience collaborating with people who think differently than them, for all the talk about diversity, many of them can't handle working with someone who voted the other way. So if we just focus on social media, it's liberals use it more than conservatives, and liberal girls use it the most. So Jean Twenge says it might just be that the liberal girls spend so many hours a day on social media, and it's incredibly bad for your mental health, whereas conservative religious kids don't. But I think it's a lot more than that. And what I've learned while writing the book, I began by focusing on social media, but I now see that it's not just social media. It's what I've been calling the phone-based childhood. So for all of human history, for millions of years, all mammals play. Mammal childhood is about building up your brain, and you do that through play. Anyone who's had a puppy knows it's all about play. We had play-based childhoods up until around 2010. I've seen data in Britain, I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was something like 60% of British kids in 2009, 2010, 60% of them used to go over to a friend's house sometimes each week. And then by 2015, that had dropped to something like 20%. I may be wrong on the numbers, but the thing is, kids used to actually see each other in person. And once they all got phones and loaded with social media for the girls, it's video games for the boys, childhood stops being play-based, which is what a mammal brain needs to wire up properly. It stops being play-based. It becomes phone-based, where phone includes video game consoles, all the stuff that makes your social interactions virtual, often asynchronous, disembodied, transitory. So it's a complete, what I'm calling it, the great rewiring of childhood. It happened between 2010 and 2015. It hit the US, Canada, Britain, Australia, New Zealand exactly the same way. New Zealand's a little bit later, but the US, UK, Canada are exactly in lockstep about what happened to our kids' mental health.